I'm a female corrections officer, prison guard or CO, in a state with a relatively high number of death row inmates. However, few executions are actually carried out. I used to work for a large county, but I work with a different agency now. This county was my first CO job years ago, and before that I had worked in retail and customer service while studying criminal justice, so I was really green. I used to be very liberal. I'm still liberal about a lot of things, but the job does change your perspective for most people. One thing that I used to believe very strongly was that no human being could be truly evil. This particular county jail is one of the oldest in the country, so parts of it have a totally linear layout. What I mean is that you have a long stretch of corridor with cells on either side, and the COs have to walk up and down to supervise the inmates. I am actually giving enough information for anyone with good Google skills to figure that out. As you can imagine, these linear layouts are not in style anymore because you cannot see every cell at the same time. But every inmate can see you. I have to say that units like this are extremely creepy too. I'm going to call this corridor the condos. We didn't call it that, but I do not want to share the exact term which is specific to the jail. Less than 10 years ago, a quadruple stabbing homicide happened not far from where I grew up. The murderer, Michaels, described it as a butchering, and he killed his former girlfriend, her family, and their neighbor, because he came over when he heard the screams. When the police found Michaels soaked in blood and asked him what happened, he said, "It's obvious, I just killed everyone." The cop said that he seemed completely emotionless when he said it. At that time, I'd only been a CO for about 4 months, and our facility received him as a pre-trial detainee. Now obviously, he wasn't our first or only murderer, but the nature of the crime. Stabbings indicate a more dangerous personality than a shooting, for one thing. And his lack of remorse was horrifying. He was considered a volatile inmate. So we placed him in an observation cell in the middle of the condos, where a CO could always keep an eye on him. He would stand at his glass door in silence most of the day, just watching everyone. I swear he only really spoke when he had visits. He actually had a full visit list of goth girls who would come in and swear they were in love with him. I don't know if this means anything, but his ex was a big girl, and he used to draw pictures of the overweight female COs. For note, he was skinny and white with brown hair. One day, I was working as a utilities officer, basically a floater who relieves people for breaks and helps out as needed. At this jail, utilities officers also got away with a ton of downtime and BSing. I was hanging out at one end of the condos where you could look down and see a lot of the jail, talking to another officer on duty. As they say, there are no secrets in jail. Plus, I was aware that there were points throughout the jail where you could hear very well into neighboring cells, that sort of thing. We were being pretty quiet though, plus we stood a good 50 yards from Michael's observation cell. Also, you have to imagine it would be difficult to stand in the observation cell and press your face against the glass to see the people standing at a right angle so far from you. I was telling the CO a funny story about my weekend, which I wouldn't do out on a correctional unit nowadays, but we weren't getting into anything too personal either. It was a long story involving my fiancé at the time. I wrapped up talking to this CO because I had to go to a gate to relieve another officer for chow, and I had to pass Michael's cell. I didn't like walking past it because he stood there and stared at you, and back then I wasn't so good at hiding my nervousness. He always had his head slightly tilted down so you could see white under the irises of his eyes. Again, rarely saying a word, but today was different. I took one step past his door and I heard him say, "Edgecombe," in a barely audible whisper. I didn't even know he knew my name. Yes, our last names are on our uniforms, but I was never his primary officer and we never interacted. It caught me off guard, so instead of ignoring it, it stopped me in my tracks and I backpedaled to the door. He pointed to his mouth and I leaned in to listen. His eyes looked so dark, I remember I felt hypnotized. He proceeded to recite word for word the story I had just quietly told the officer at the end of the condos, less than 2 minutes before, even copying the sound of my voice down to a subtle lisp. This seemed to go on forever. I felt like we were the only two there. No 22mm of glass protecting me, just a 5-foot-tall female and a murderer. I remember thinking for the first time of another human being. This is evil and unfixable. Finally, I said, "Sir, did you need something?" He started to laugh hysterically and I walked away. Working here, I have been assaulted by other inmates. I've had piss thrown in my eyes. People play mind games with me constantly. I've met some damn good lip readers too. But this was like something else. Now I work at a maximum security institution where I babysit sex offenders and murderers and pedophiles. I don't know how to make it make sense to you, but this was the one and only time in my life where I felt inside of me like I was dealing with something not human. Michaels is in another institution now. He's on death row. He refuses to appeal. He made it clear to the press that this decision is not out of remorse. He has none. He just doesn't give a shit, and it's most logical in his mind for him to die. This story takes place in a very small town in the northeast region of the United States in the summer before I went off to college in 2015. After I graduated high school, my parents decided to move to a smaller, more affordable house, about 45 minutes north into the mountains. We stayed at my childhood home because the public schools in my area were the best in my state. My parents really valued my education. I ended up going off to an amazing university, and now I have an incredible career because of my excellent education. As most people in the US know, amazing public education usually means higher property taxes. My parents got to the point where they could not afford the taxes on their 4,000 square foot home anymore and decided to sell it just after I graduated from high school. Their home is humble and it sits on a beautiful piece of land on the side of a beautiful mountain. The trees are always so green and there was a lot of wildlife around. They don't have many neighbors either, as their driveway is about 1.5 miles long. But this is what they chose to live in after I went off to college. In August of 2015, we moved into this new house. I wasn't planning on staying long as I was getting ready to head off to college as a freshman for the first time. We decided to have a little housewarming party with a bunch of family friends and my best friend at the time as well. My dad was manning the barbecue, my mom was making the drinks. We were playing with our dogs. It was a grand time and everyone had a lot of fun. My dad had built a brick fire pit in our backyard. Just to set the scene for you here, the pit was about 30 feet from our back patio door, and we had a picnic table and other seats all around. Behind the seating was the tree line. It was so dark sometimes at night, you needed a flashlight to see 10 feet in front of you. With the fire pit lit, you couldn't see someone unless they were either sitting next to you or across from you in front of the pit. My best friend decided to stay the night, and we asked my dad if we could make s'mores. As it was getting a little chilly, as it does in the late summer in the northeast at night, my parents left us outside with my dog, Nino. Nino was a huge 100-pound black lab pit bull mix. He was a very loyal and incredible dog that my dad trained as his right hand. He was our protector, as he could run extremely fast and was very strong, and always alerted us when something went bump in the night. Side note, he passed away a week before I got married in 2022. He was 17 years old and lived an adventurous life with my parents, hunting squirrels, laying out in the sun, and running amok. Nino was lying in between us, facing the tree line, and my best friend was to my right. Our backs were to the dark, dense tree line. Our first mistake. We were laughing, joking, and eating s'mores together, planning for the future, and generally excited about going off to college together. She decided to play some music, and we just relaxed, feeling content and at ease. It was a perfect summer night, until Nino started growling. I saw his ears perk up, and his head cocked to the side. He then sat up and continued to growl. My friend and I both looked at each other, thinking Nino just saw a stray animal or something non-threatening. This area was known for lots of deer, and rarely a coyote or wolf. As he was trained to help my dad hunt deer, we assumed it was a buck or a fawn in the distance behind us. We went back to singing along to the music playing and talking about our fall 2015 class schedule. Again, Nino started growling. Our second mistake. We did not call out for my dad. We didn't even think there was a problem until Nino started barking repeatedly. This time, louder and more vicious. He stood up and started barking, as if alerting us to activity beyond the tree line that we could not see. He stood up as well, the fire obscuring our view. My best friend took her phone, paused the music, and turned on her flashlight. She started to walk towards the edge of the tree line with Nino by her side, still growling and barking, alerting us to not go any further and to call for help. We stood still in silence, listening. I was too afraid to even breathe at this point. She started walking into the woods, and when she shined her flashlight, she saw a figure, someone peering behind a tree. A man with a green shirt and green pants on, maybe 5'11" with glasses. We screamed and ran as fast as we could inside, leaving the fire unattended, and this creepy man behind the tree. What we did not know at this time is where this man came from. We crashed through their front door, breathless, with Nino trailing behind us, and startled my mother, who was washing dishes and cleaning up from the party. She was talking to my dad about something they saw on the news, and I think we cut him off mid-sentence to explain that there was a man dressed in all green lurking behind a tree in the woods. We didn't know how long he was there or if he was still there, but we were both crying. I remember feeling extremely sick, like I was going to throw up. My dad jumped up, grabbed his shotgun and headlamp, and ran outside with Nino. My mom gathered us into the living room, shut off all the lights in the house off, and locked the doors. She told us to be quiet and that she was going to call 911. As she did that, my best friend and I shook in fear. We were anticipating gunshots and screaming, but never heard any. My mom, now on the phone with 911, described what we saw to the operator. I heard my mom say, "Oh," in an alarming way. At this point, my dad came back inside and my mom let him know that the police were on the way to us. Being in a small town on the mountain with less than 10,000 people means that we don't get our own police force. We get the state police every time there is a call made to emergency responders. My dad put his gun away and waited outside for the police to show up. To our bewilderment, they didn't just send one police officer, but like 10 and an entire SWAT team and helicopter to circle the area. We were rightfully terrified. I was practically having a panic attack at this point. The police officers came inside our home and asked my best friend and me what the man was wearing, what he looked like, if we were able to discern any scars or tattoos. We explained the weird matching green outfit and the glasses. The officer excused himself and alerted the police and SWAT members outside of our description. They started to search the woods beyond our home, with guns drawn, flashlights, and the helicopter circling above. They advised us to stay inside and that they would let us know when if they found something. After about 25 minutes, we got another knock on our door. It was not one but two officers at this time. My dad let them in and they began to explain the situation. One officer explained that we must have seen on the news that a convicted felon from the prison about 20 miles away escaped into the mountains. The police set up a perimeter of 10 miles around the prison, but the convict escaped them yet again. The outfit the man was wearing, as well as our description, signaled to them that the escaped convict was 100% lurking through our remote, densely wooded backyard that night. The all-green outfit was a standard issue for prisoners in my state then. They did not, however, find the man near us after 25 minutes of searching. He was still out there. The officers let us know that they were going to have a squad car stay and watch our house for a few days, as they were unable to locate the fugitive and believe he is still an active threat to our safety. That night, and for 3 nights after that, we all slept in the living room together. My dad's shotgun was within arm's reach of him at all times. Later that week, we got another knock on our door from the officers stationed outside of our home. They let us know that the man was back in police custody and that we were safe. They advised us to get security cameras and how sorry they were that this happened to us. After that, my parents spent about $10,000 on security cameras and fencing for our backyard. It is all now fenced in, and we have about 4 cameras to watch the tree line at all times. I guess you never know what will happen or what goes bump in the night. I'm a 21-year-old male. It was July 4th, 2019. I live in Kansas in the USA. At the time, I worked as a corrections officer at a maximum security prison on the night shift. The cell house I was in charge of was the maximum general population, 1 man to a cell. This is where the worst of the worst are, the murderers and anything else you can imagine, the overall worst of society. Before work, I was doing the typical American 4th of July thing, grilling, blowing up fireworks, had a beer or two, having a great time with my now wife and family. My wife kept telling me I needed to just call in sick and take the day without pay. I said no because we were a little behind on bills, but I really wish I would have listened to her now. As the night went on, it came time for us to leave my mom's and for me to go home and get ready for work. I took my wife home and dropped her off, got ready and left. My wife's car was broke down, so she was stuck at home for the night. As I drove to work, which was about an hour drive away, I watched the fireworks going off all around. It was sad. I had never had to work on the force before. After I got to work and got all of my equipment, I got into my cell house. Business as usual. Inmates were showered and locked up. I got my night cleaning crew out so they could clean the rest of the cell house, and I met up with my partner for the night in the officer station to get our briefing from the last shift. Fast forward an hour or so into my shift. So now it's around 12:30 a.m. Another officer came into the cell house. So now there's 3 of us. This happened often on the night shift, as there was nothing to do except rounds every half hour or so. Out of nowhere, we hear an inmate laughing like a witch, like a cackle. That was strange, but nothing to be alarmed of. Drugs were somehow a bad problem in that facility. Still is, as far as I know. Eventually, after a few more cackles, I decided to go see who was making the sound, in case they were high. I walked through and checked all 200 inmates. Nothing. There were a small few that were even awake, so I brushed it off and just went back to my office. My partner and other officer were asking if there was anyone that needed their cells searched. I couldn't think of anyone in particular I suspected of having anything, so I went and checked all the cells again to see if I could get a whiff of smoke or see something. As I was walking on the second-story cell run, I found an inmate that was acting weird. He was in his bed facing the wall, talking. This was also common as there were a lot of inmates with minor mental issues. I figured he was high because he turned and looked at me and told me to fuck off. I was going to leave him alone, but the disrespect made me change my mind. Time is now 12:40 a.m., July 5th. I walk back to the office and tell the other two officers which cell he was in, and I wanted him searched. Cell 218. So how the cell house is laid out is there are 100 cells per level. From the officer station, you can see the north side, first and second floor, but you can't see the south side unless you walk the 50 feet over to it. Picture the movie Shawshank Redemption type cell house, except instead of being able to look through and see cells across, you just see a wall. The cells are literally back to back. As the officers go to pull him out of his cell to search it, I went to the ground floor and was watching from below. Reason why, I wanted to get the inmate on the ground level and it's not the second floor. All that was there for protection from going over the edge was a handrail. I noticed the inmate was taking forever to get out of his cell. He came out in shorts and a do-rag, which is weird because he wasn't fully clothed. Didn't even put sandals on, just shorts and a do-rag. Yet took 5 minutes to get out. That made me nervous. The inmate was a 6-foot-tall, 250-pound muscle-bound dude. Definitely had size on us. So from the grounds, I holler at him and tell him to come down to the ground, that he could use the phone or check his email or commissary. He declined my offer, which never happens, so I knew something was up. He was watching them search his cell from the control panel box. This was alarming. They were in his cell. I was on the ground. He could have easily ambushed them. He would have made it to them before I could get up the stairs. So to try to keep them safe, I went upstairs to the inmate. He was standing in the corner away against the handrails at the top of the stairs. He knew I was the OIC, officer in charge of that cell house, and he knew I was the only one that saw him talking to himself. He asked me why I was having his cell searched, and I lied. I said, "It's nothing personal, man. I have a quota I have to fill for cells searched in a night, and you were awake, so I chose to have you searched. It'll just take a second." He was uneasy. He was pacing. He had turned just right, and I saw in his do-rag the Samsung logo reflecting the cell house light. I knew there was going to be a problem as soon as I saw it. He had a cell phone. I called over the radio for 2 additional officers to come to me. The inmate didn't seem to notice I made the call. My supervisors responded, saying 2 of them were on their way. Side note, at this time, only segregation officers had protective vests. So out of the 5 of us that were now in there, only 1 had a vest. I was not that one. The officers were, names changed. South had a vest, McMormick, Collins, Sheffield, and me. Time is now 12:58 a.m. As soon as South and McMormick got up to me, I told the inmate to turn around and cuff up. South and McMormick were on the inmate's right side. I was in front of him. Why? He angrily asked me. I refused to give him an answer at first. After a few minutes, I had enough. I told him, "Look, man, I can see the cell phone in your do-rag. You know you're not supposed to have that." The inmate then gets a defeated look on his face, but fire in his eyes. His body relaxes, and he slowly reaches up to retrieve the phone. But does he pull out a phone? No, he pulls out a 6-inch sharpened metal rod with ripped fabric wrapped around the bottom as a handle. Everything froze for me. I knew I was going to die. Everything starts moving again. I now have an inmate twice my size charging me, thrusting quickly and repeatedly towards me. "Oh shit," was all I managed to yell. I immediately went into defense mode, trying to grab his arm and disarm him. His wrist kept slipping. I couldn't keep a hold of it, but at least I managed to block his attempts at my lower abdomen. Suddenly, he aimed high and went for my chest. I felt him make contact. I had just been stabbed in the right part of my chest. "Spray him," I yelled at the top of my lungs. McCormick was already working on spraying the MK9 OC spray. For my military listeners, you know what I mean. For others, MK9 comes as a pressured spray bottle, about 20 fluid ounces. You can buy it at camping stores in the USA. It's called bear spray. It's the stuff that you spray in bears' eyes so you can get them away. South had come up behind the inmate and grabbed him around the chest and pulled him backwards, right as McCormick sprayed. I didn't realize it at the time, but the spray hit me. I was able to turn and run. I ran around the stair railing, past the panel box, and out onto the run of cells on the second story. I ran past a few cells and I turned around to see that he wasn't chasing me, but South was wrestling him to the ground while gagging on the OC, as was I and McCormick. Sheffield, having heard the commotion, came running out of the cell, saw what was happening and ran in to help. The inmate grabbed South by the vest and tried to throw him over the end of the landing, but South dropped to his knees before he went over. I grabbed my shoulder mic and screamed into it. Level A response to Charlie 2 now. Dispatch said something back, but I couldn't hear it. I started to charge back to help save South. Before I could get away from the cell, one of the CLs grabbed me from behind and told me not to go. Due to the layout of the runs, I didn't see, but Sheffield grabbed the inmate from behind and body slammed him on his face and began cuffing him. As soon as Collins let me go, I stood still and watched. Up the stairs came 4 more officers, the captain and a lieutenant. The LT came over and asked me what happened. I started to explain, but he cut me off after he saw blood coming out of my left arm. After taking me out of the cell house, he made me lift my shirt because he saw the blood. He examined all my wounds. He had me remove all my equipment and hold paper towels to my arm. I was rushed to the ER. I was able to grab my phone out of my rental car. Had totaled my car a few weeks prior by hitting a deer. I called my wife and told her what happened, and she called my parents and siblings. Luckily, my injuries weren't too bad. I was stabbed 4 times. One on my left arm just below the elbow. That was a through and through. Blade went in on one side and out the other. Twice in the top of my left hand, and the one that hit my chest went in the skin and hit one of my ribs, keeping it out of my lungs. Out of 37 plunges, I think it's safe to say I'm lucky to be here writing this story. I didn't sleep for 2 days following the event, and I still have nightmares almost daily. I'm always paranoid. I openly carry a gun now. After my attack, I was forced to resign for safety reasons. Everyone statewide that works in max prisons now has vests. None of the people from there talk to me anymore. I feel abandoned. I have one friend from that facility that I still see. My sergeant, who wasn't there that night. Court is coming soon to add 3 more attempted murders on this guy. Turns out he was a shot caller for the Crips gang. When I was 18, I worked at a local Target. This was when we used to have a wall next to the registers of Pokemon, baseball, collectible cards, etc. And Starbucks in front of the register by the front doors. For context, I'm a female. Well, one day I was filling this wall with more cards, and an awkward tall man came up and started looking at the Pokemon section next to me. He asked, "Do you like Pokemon?" And I said yes, which then led to us talking about it. I didn't think anything of it. He picked some, checked out, and left. 3 days later, he returns to the store, finds me, and buys me candy and tells me to have a nice day. So things start escalating. He would come in frequently looking for me, started sitting at the Starbucks tables and watching me while I work. Which then eventually, he started buying me more candy, Starbucks drinks, and flowers. And then little girl panties and pacifiers, little girl hair accessories. Which of course I'm freaked out now. I tried telling my bosses, but they couldn't do anything about it, they said. Called the cops and they couldn't do anything either. He followed me to the back room one day since I started leaving the registers whenever he came into the store. And that's when we were able to call the cops because he cornered me in the back room. But thankfully, our stockroom guys were back there to basically save me. We were able to get a restraining order on him for the store so he couldn't enter anymore. That's when he started waiting outside for me, following me to my car and leaving love notes on my vehicle for me to come out to. It was terrifying and my mom knew, but again, we couldn't do anything. One day, he actually followed me from my work to my mother's house where I lived at the time. I had never seen his car until this day, and he stood outside the house, singing love songs and reading poems he wrote me, really loudly. My mother called the cops and we kept telling him to leave, and when the cops got there, they were finally able to get him to go away. But now he left me notes at my house, sent me letters and packages with pornography, sexy outfits, and girly panties, and baby stuff, etc. During all of this time, my mom and I were trying to get a restraining order on him, ourselves, and charge him for harassment, but it's not like it stopped him. Finally, one night I was coming back home from work, and he waited around the corner of my house and attacked me. He grabbed me around my face and dragged me to the ground. I screamed so loud and so much that I quickly had neighbors come outside and help me out. He got arrested at that point. I had enough evidence saved up to be able to take him to court, and now he's been in jail for 8 years, due to be released in 2021. He's actually in the Jester 4 unit. He was stalking another local girl that I connected with, so we could help each other out after he got sent away. She was just starting to get his attention, so luckily she never got hurt. Back in the 60s, my dad worked as a guard at a prison near Miami. He described his most memorable experience to me recently. He said that there was one prisoner who was a lot like young Hannibal Lecter, very calm but very menacing. He always kept his cool no matter what. There was something threatening about him. Well, one day, young Lecter was able to start a riot on his cell block purely by motivating the other prisoners into a frenzy. He didn't participate in the riot at all, but he got every other prisoner to start a fit in their cell. My dad and a few other guards were called down to the cell block to quiet them all down. He says that when he got down there, every prisoner was screaming and throwing themselves against the walls of their cells, and shouting profanity and insults to the guards. That is, every prisoner except Lecter. He was the only quiet one on the whole block. My dad came up to close his cell, and this guy was standing near the back with his hands folded, staring my dad directly in the eye, and muttering a random sequence of numbers with a strange smile on his face. My dad stood there, trying to figure out what the numbers meant. Then it finally hit him. The prisoner was reciting my dad's home phone number on repeat.